Books, yes, I have many books. They're all here. I've got stacked up all over the place, and my house is pretty much littered with either books or houseplants and all over the shelves. So over the years, I think it's fair to say that I've come to understand that reading is actually quite a skill, and it's not something that we're all naturally in tune to. So I've come up with 4 top tips on how to develop and enhance your reading. Number 1 relates to environment, and specifically room temperature. We ideally want that room temperature to be between 23 and 24 degrees Celsius or 73.4 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason for that is because of your circadian clock. Your circadian clock is your internal clock that regulates your sleep pattern and your wake state. And there's lots of things that influence that, and one of those is room temperature. So the lower that temperature goes, the more our focus and our alertness is actually switched off. So we go into more of a docile state. So any hotter than that, we're simply going to become quite uncomfortable and unable to focus. So we want that temperature to be ideally between 23 and 24 degrees, and that is to maintain focus. So top tip number 1 is room temperature. Tip number 2 also relates to environment, but more specifically lighting. Now I like to go for as much natural lighting as I can possibly get in the early part of the day in order for my dopamine levels to be spiked and as heightened as they possibly can be. Now when it comes to the reading, then I want that natural light source to be behind me, because I like to read from hard copies and paperback, and I want that light to reflect back off that page. If I was to face that light source, then I'm going to get more of a shadow and an overcast, and that then is going to reduce my focus and it's going to send me again back into that sleep state, because lighting is also something that impacts your circadian clock. Now, supplementary lighting can assist here, and that's fantastic when you can get it. So turning all those lights on is a great way to additionally support that lighting. So tip number 2 is lighting. Now tip number 3 relates to positioning. Now positioning can be a little bit tricky when you're reading from a paperback copy. If you're reading from a computer screen or a tablet or some sort of device, you can actually purchase mounts that raise the sight of what you're reading, so it's in line with your natural eye line. You want your head to be in a neutral position, because they found people who look down when they're reading, their focus tends to deteriorate and they switch off. It also additionally puts a lot of strain on your neck, so that's not going to be very enjoyable. But if you're like me, you kind of have to read a paperback copy because the smell, the texture, the feel. I immerse myself in a book a lot far better when I'm reading a paperback than I do on my sort of digital devices. So now that can be tricky, because when you're reading from a paperback, you get a bit fatigued and your shoulders can get a bit achy, but ideally you want to keep it in line with your eyes. And we mentioned lighting, so we want that lighting, that natural light source to be behind us, we're reflecting back. And that is probably the best position I could probably find to do a bit of reading for extended periods of time. Sitting back onto a sofa is fine, but so long as my head is in an upright position and most of my back is in an upright position to give me that focus. So top tip number 3 is positioning. Now my 4th tip might sound obvious and a bit irritating initially, so bear with me, but that is simply repetition. You have to repeat something enough times, and I did go over this in my Atomic Habits video on one of the laws of behavioral change. But the more you repeat something, the more the stress element in that habit becomes reduced, and you're removing that from that. You're removing the friction from that task. So by repeating something enough times, if you want to read a book, if you keep it in plain sight, so if you're reading it enough times, it's always going to be around you. You're going to purchase things like bookmarks that sort of enhance the experience and make it a little bit more pleasurable, a little bit more fun. But by repeating something enough times, you simply become a lot more in tuned to that. So top tip number 4 is going to be repetition. So I hope you enjoyed that. Well, if you made it this far, please give a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and if there's any comments that you'd like to add, please leave them down in the comment section.